1903, and the last one in 1979. Several effusive eruptions have also occurred at the volcano. In 1979, an effusive phase follows the initial explosive phase of the eruption. In 1971-72, an effusive eruption created a lava dome that existed until the 1979 eruption. The most recent dome building effusive eruption began on December 27, 2020. Visual observations on December 29, 2020 confirmed that high temperatures detected by satellites used to track fires were in fact caused by magma reaching the surface. With that background, we now would like to invite Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, to make his presentation. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and good evening to all our friends from overseas who are here with us. And I see that Professor Robertson is on. Also, well, he's not a friend from overseas, he's a Vincentian born. Our friends from the Seismic Research Center, I want to say how happy I am that members of the community of Georgetown and the back area, which is in the red zone, that they are on this consultation, this community meeting this evening. I'm not going to speak for any particular length of time. In fact, I'm hoping that I can just spend 5 minutes and let the professionals speak to the matter. Just to say to the people of Georgetown and Langley Park that the government of St. Vincent has been working assiduously with the Seismic Research Center, with the Regional Security System, with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, and of course, the Seismic Research Center has been front and center in all of our work, and we thank them very much for being on the ground to help us monitoring this oozing eruption thus far. We are in a much better place in having information because of the number of stations which we have, observation points and facilities we have put in place together with the SRC. They have been instrumental, and we have in our budget, which is presented, the estimates are presented tomorrow to Parliament, significant monies to protect these sites and to put the facilities at the Belmont Observatory in much better shape. We are also going to strengthen the staffing of NEMO, including with a geophysicist, a geoscientist, and also an engineer to be able to build to maintain the equipment. As you noticed, Dr. Pat Joseph, you had made those recommendations to me in a memo, and we have implemented them quite promptly. So it's a question of recruiting those persons. The resources are in the 2021 budget. We have had a volcano emergency plan, but just recently updated. I have a copy here in my hand called the St. Vincent and Grenadines Volcano Emergency and Standard Operating Procedures. A work of this kind is critical, and I'm sure that Michelle will speak to it when she does her professional presentation. And we always have to make adjustments, hoping for the best and planning for the worst. We have a list of all the the centers, the centers where we can go to if the volcano was to erupt in an explosive fashion. And we are also not only looking at the schools in the areas from South Central Windward to Central Leeward, but very much so also in the Grenadines, and we have gotten offers amounting to close to 3,000 rooms in facilities outside of St. Vincent and Grenadines. And of course we have a number of guest houses lined up here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, just in case. We hope we don't have to get there. And Michelle will talk a little bit about the plan, the volcano emergency plan. I want to urge everyone to be calm in this matter, to be very patient. And I want you to listen to the official sources for government information. In these days when you have so much fake news coming on Facebook and other social media platforms, a lot of just pure wrong information can be put out, and you just listen to the official voices. Be assured that the government is putting all the requisite resources to this effort, and we have a detailed plan, and that plan has been discussed, and we'll continue to discuss it with the persons who potentially would be affected in the red zone and in the orange zone. And I want to give you that assurance. You know that over the last 20 years, when I give you an assurance, you can essentially, as we say in the countryside, put your pot on the fire and expect that it will happen. There are always going to be challenges. Not everything will go perfectly. If the worst happens, we are even, just in case we have to move persons by boat, we are making those sorts of pre-arrangements and to make sure that the jetty, for instance, on Chateaubelair is in order. And if the persons have to go into Barry, that one is in order. We just got a report on the one in Layu. And of course, we'll move people out of Oya by the wharf if necessary. But we have enough vehicles on the road, and that will have to be managed properly. So there are a lot of logistics. I give just an indication of the many moving parts which we have to address. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, because we are hoping for the best and planning for the worst, and we hope the worst never happens. And we just keep ourselves properly informed. Every single household should have their own family emergency plan. There's a lot of information on the radio about what you must pack in your bag, keep it handy, so at the shortest moments you can move, and so on and so forth. All those practical things are there outlined. Listen. Don't just listen to the music on the various radio stations and gossip talk. Listen to serious business concerning your own welfare, particularly on a matter like this. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. At this point, we'd like to introduce Professor Richard Robertson of Vincentian, who has been heading the UWI seismic research team that's here in St. Vincent on the ground, and he will give his presentation at this time. Professor Robertson.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'd just like to share my screen. Right, yes. And thank you very much, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, all. I think we're here to try to educate the Georgetown community about what can happen. So I'm going to take you through a few slides to speak about where we were and where we are and where we're hoping to get to. Just by way of introduction, we are part of the Seismic Research Center. We monitor earthquakes and volcanoes throughout the Eastern Caribbean, and we are set up to do precisely what we are doing now, which is to respond to emergencies like the eruption in St. Vincent and provide government with the advice that they need. We are not singular in terms of having volcanoes in St. Vincent. We have lots of volcanoes in the region. We just happen to have one that likes to go off every now and then, more often than perhaps we would like, but it does. And therefore we have to learn to live with it. La Soufriere is a really interesting stratovolcano. It's quite high, it's quite wide, and it has a lovely summit crater. I'd like to take you through some aspects of it. We've had historic eruptions, 1718, 1812, 1902, 1979, and in between we've had still things going on. Sometimes it has a dome, sometimes it doesn't. And you've had various forms. This is how it looked prior to 1902. The 1900s, it had a lake. Just before 1902, it continued to have a lake. And then after 1902, you had the damage from the eruption that you had there. There's some pictures that show you some of the damage that occurred because it had an explosive eruption. But by the 1930s to the 70s, this is how it looked. It had a beautiful crater lake in it. And then in 1971, a dome was created, an island was created, it boiled the lake. And then that actually went on for about a year. And that's how the lake looked from 71, the crater looked from 71 to 79. You had a lake in it, and people continued to use it. But then in 79, it grew a dome. And people looking at the current dome and saying how it looks in a particular way, you could see it has the same kind of, generally same kind of morphology, so dark colored rock with lots of steaming going on. So that's how it looked in 79 before it got to the stage that it was eventually later on. The fact is, we've had periods in St. Vincent, in Soufriere, when you have had what we call effusive eruptions, creating domes. There's a suggestion there was one in the 1780s, in 1880, 1971, 72. And then you've had periods when you've had explosive eruptions, 1718, 1812, 1902, 1979. So you've had either eruptions that created domes or eruptions that was explosive. My slide seemed to be kicking forward by itself for some reason. But anyhow, this is how the configuration of the crater looked just prior to the current activity. You had a 1979 dome, you had a crater lake. This is a view from the eastern side if you went out on the Georgetown side. And the area we're going to look at and focus in on is the southwestern side, where you have a new dome being created. But if you went up on the eastern side, this is what you would have seen prior to this current time. Now, we've always had seismicity or earthquakes associated with the volcano. We've always had periods when you've had more earthquakes than normal. At Soufriere, you generally tend to have, sometimes 1 or 2 periods when you have 1 or 2 per month, sometimes 1 or 2 per day. But there have been periods in the past, and this is just a graph that shows you 2019 to present, when it has had a lot more. So you've had periods when you have had tens rather than 1 or 2 events per day. And that's kind of normal. You go up and you come down. Just prior to the current activity at the end of last year, we had a period in November where we had one of those elevated periods of seismicity. But in each case, it doesn't necessarily foretell that something is about to happen. So that when the dome was first realized on the 27th, was actually because of satellite imagery, as the moderator said, and the satellite imagery was further confirmed on the 30th, on the 29th, on the 30th, but even before that, subsequent investigation indicated that there's actually a picture on the 27th. Some tourists went up and they saw the beginning of the dome growth, which has continued since then. So essentially, from the 27th onwards, we've had a massive piece of mound of rock being created in the volcano. Basically, magma is coming from beneath the surface, slowly coming onto the surface. It's becoming solid, and it's forming a rounded mass of rock. And initially, it's formed as a classic rounded, sort of equal shaped, classic rounded shape. But then, as it became pressed against the sides, it has begun to move sideways, essentially, along the crater. And this is a profile that was done from photogrammetry work that was done by Dr. Adam Stinton, who's on the call, a colleague from Montserrat Volcano Observatory, which shows you how the dome has developed from its initial sort of shape on the 3rd of January. And as you see, as it began to abut against the 1979 dome, and as it began to press against the crater wall, it began to go sideways more so than it got higher. So currently, generally, its growth is more lateral, sideways, in other words, rather than high. And at present, this is a picture recently taken, this is 2 days ago, of how the dome looked. Its total volume, based on a survey that we did using a drone, suggests that it is about 4.45 million cubic meters in total size in terms of its mass. Its dimensions, its longest side is 428 meters, and the sides that are butting against the crater wall and the 1979 dome is about 217 meters, and then it's about 80 or so meters high. It's growing from the last estimate that was done on the 18th of January, it's growing at a rate of about 2.7 cubic meters per second. But if you look at the long-term sort of growth from when it started, the growth rate is actually smaller than that, probably about 1.7, a little bit around that at rate per second. So its long-term growth has not really changed very much, but essentially it started at a certain rate, went up a little bit, came down, went up a little bit, and it's not unusual for it to do that in terms of how domes operate. So that's the situation. We have put in a lot more monitoring stations because, again, that's how we respond when volcanoes erupt. We send a team on the ground, and they essentially beef up the network. They put in more stations. Now, in this case, in the case of St. Vincent, our network had suffered significantly from the fact that we couldn't travel because of COVID, and therefore, by the time the end of last year, we were more or less down to 2 stations. One was at Belmont. There was one at the summit that was working, but not very useful, and then there was one in Camden Park. Since we've been here for about 4 weeks, we have rapidly moved to augment the network. So we now have 2 stations on the volcano, particularly one on the summit, close to the summit, and one about 130 way up. The other one on the summit is about 200 meters, 300 meters away from the rim itself. And then you have a number of stations on the lower flanks of the volcano, in Fancy, in Ovia, in Georgetown, and we have plans to put one in Orange Hill. As the weeks go on, we'd actually add some additional seismic stations. But in addition to the seismic stations, we have also put in stations that monitor not just for ground shaking, which is what the seismic stations do, but is monitoring for any change in shape of the volcano. And these are GPS stations. We have put them in that would look at the potential swelling of the volcano because of influx of magma. We've put them in at Fancy, near to the summit, and there was one before at Belmont. We've put one in Georgetown. So essentially, we've moved to make the monitoring network more in a state where we could detect things. We're working with collaborators overseas, colleagues overseas, to use remote sensing techniques like satellite imagery. This is an example of 2 images, one on the 2nd of January and the 13th of January, that shows you how you could detect the change in the size of the mountain, and that's one way in which you could track it. We have moved towards, we have collected rocks from the volcano, a sample of it, and we will use it to try to analyze various things. Where's the material coming from? How is it interacting with other material that was there? Was it depth? What was the rate at which is coming up? Those kinds of things will be determined from the analysis of these rocks. We have taken pictures of it with a thermal camera that allows us to get an idea of the temperature. There's an example here of a picture taken by Dr. Stinton when we were sampling the dome. And it shows you a picture, regular picture on the left, one with a thermal camera on the right, showing you the dome is up to 590 degrees Celsius at the surface. It's even hotter beneath the surface. It's quite hot rock, and that has implications in terms of how it operates. The main effects currently of the eruption is really confined to the crater itself and the surrounding areas. And this picture here shows you classically one of the most significant things, that is vegetation damage in the southwestern direction on the upper flank of the volcano, that is largely due to acidic gases. Basically, there's a lot of gases coming out of the volcano, mainly water vapor, mainly simply just the water in the crater being converted to steam because of the hot rock. But also you have carbon dioxide, and in addition, you have a lesser amounts of sulfur, various sulfur products, things like hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen chloride, hydrogen fluoride. And these gases, when they mix with moisture, they become very weak acids. And when they get wafted by the breeze up there that comes off the dome, they go down slope. And this is a picture that shows you when we first came on the left, how the landscape looked. And on the right, you can see that brown staining, which is because of the acidic burn from the vegetation. Now, this is happening outside the crater, as well as you have effects inside the crater. Vegetation is damaged inside the crater. In this case, this is an example of damage due to heat. The thermal effect, the fact that the hot rock, when it falls off, it can ignite the vegetation and it can cause burning. And this is some burning that happened about 2 weeks ago when people were very, very concerned because of the fact that it appeared like if there was fire on the mountain. It happened in the night and they saw the fire from the surrounding areas and understandably got quite concerned. But this kind of thing has happened and can happen and would not be unusual. We manage the crisis by defining various hazard areas. So we have done hazard maps. This is a hazard map that essentially shows you the extent of the areas that could be impacted from explosive eruptions to a large extent. It shows you the red areas, which are the areas that are most dangerous and are going to be impacted by all the nasty things that explosive eruptions do. The orange areas less so, and then you move to yellow and green areas. You move into areas that are mainly affected by ash. These are the areas, the red and the orange are the areas that you will have to move people south to minimize the impact and get them away from the negative impact of the explosive eruption if you have one. We're currently working on assessing the potential impact of just simply dome building and collapses from domes. That would have something that's slightly different than this, but it probably would assist in terms of NEMO taking the action to need to. I'll end with this, looking at what's the prognosis, what do we think, currently given what we know is likely to happen. One is that the dome can continue growing. Clearly it's grown. Soufriere domes in the past have grown from periods of from 3 months to up to a year. The 1979 dome went on for about 3 or 4 months. The 1971 dome went on for about a year. So clearly they can go on for more than a few weeks to months. And that's clearly one effect. And that itself would have some effects depending on how big the dome becomes and depending on whether or not it's able to get outside the crater in terms of the things that it do. The second thing that can happen clearly is that the eruption can stop. And there's nothing happening. It goes back to sleep. And then probably the thing that's most concerning is whether or not it goes into an explosive phase. It has an explosive eruption, in which case you'll have periods in which you'll have explosions from the volcano, and therefore you'll have a production of a lot of ash. You'll have production of these flows that go down the mountainside that will damage areas further afield, and you have ballistics and fragments of rock falling out, and you probably have things like mud flows, lahars. So all the nasty things will affect the volcano itself. This is probably the thing that one would be most concerned about at this present time. I think that's it. So in summary, we need to continue to monitor the volcano. We need to continue to work towards preparing for the worst, as the Prime Minister said, but hoping for the best. I'll await your questions and try to answer as best I can. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Professor Richard Robertson, for that presentation. Our featured film is entitled Beyond the Ashes. It's about stories and lessons learned from the 1979 La Soufriere eruption. It was produced by the Volcano Ready Communities Project through grant support from the Community Disaster Risk Reduction Fund.
Vision some nights ago, the father was talking to me, King Olo, telling me that Soufriere will come again. But that's the reason why I come here now to explain. To get them on your knees. and pray. Soufriere coming again, Vincent Chan be aware. Especially the people in Chateaubelair. Well, for Chateaubelair when we run to Chomoka, and if I hear out there laughing out kya kya kya, some people say how we making joke, how we see facts and take it for Soufriere smoke.
In 1979, I think it was around April 13th, to Friday, the sky was looking real strange. Clouds going up, and then this mushroom started cloud, and we know something was going on, and the moon was really shining.
I was baking cross buns. So while we were putting the cross buns in the oven, we heard this big explosion.
Like inside, we hear like some little gravel stone coming down on the galvanize. But it wasn't rain, but I didn't know what was dropping. So I thought my husband, I say, here on the galvanize up there. Anyhow, when he peeped out, he said, Angie, look out. When I look out, if you see the mountain, outside was dark like midnight.
Martin woke me up about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he said, Mary, I've got some bad news for you. The volcano is erupting. I said, yeah, right. This guy came up from Chateaubelair, and he started to sound the trumpet. Rosal people, I wake up, Soufriere blow, Soufriere blow. The whole of Chateaubelair is on the road. Wake up! The news spread like wildfire in a few minutes' time.
And then everybody, up and down, getting to get ready. But I could not have get one thing to walk with just what I have on my skin.
So we ran in and we got ourselves ready, pick up our bags with little clothing.
We go down to Chateaubelair, and then after we go down there, we see the government sending things for people. But I did not go on the road, I go on the sea, in a boat.
And by the time we got up to the bus, there were lots of people, children, women. We managed to board the bus. Didn't know where we were heading for. Children were crying, people were panicking and so on, because it was our first experience. But we tried to remain calm.
We helped somewhat in the evacuation. I go out in the country, out to Georgetown, and then get transportation to get people in.
We, felt very, very responsible for the into the schools and so on. We were lucky, and we, having the estate, were able to provide bananas, and we had a village shop. We opened that up to everybody, and they were okay for the first 48 hours. And then, we had to then start leaning on the government to provide for everybody.
The government used to supply food stuff now and then. But from that, we don't have to furnish our own thing. Like buying fish and all those things, we didn't have to do that.
There's some camps though where although you cook and give you food, it was really hard to really feed everybody at the time. As a matter of fact, too, that there are some persons who will leave in the camps and go out, and when they come back, it's not lunchtime, it's not food time then. And then they would have finished all the things, and then you start making noise and like that. But there's some people who were very lucky to that. They got houses to stay in with their family, so they didn't go to any camps or anything like that.
I never went to a shelter. After we left town, we went out to Caliacqua, and we were staying with a friend in their house.
They stayed in those schools for 3 months.
The government put it over the air. Say the volcano is finished, and then the evacuated people have to get home.
After the eruptions and people returned, we had a lot of cleaning to do because the ash all over.
Ash was all about. Even in the house, I don't know how the ashes managed to get in the house.
Yeah, man, then have to go on the galvanize and get water up. They took water. And we went in plenty of the galvanize.
I mean, the roof was this thick in ash. I took a hose and I started hosing down the place, not realizing that the water was also full of ash.
I take days. I took jug water and flow the floor and get broom and sweep out just to get the ash.
You know, so you had a lot of cleaning up to do. You had a lot of washing some of the animals because the animals had to be let loose.
Let them loose, and they never look better.
So we lost some. You kind of have to restart.
Trouble was to know what the real losses were. Well, we thought, that we lost maybe a little bit, but in point of fact, it was a hell of a lot. When the damage hit us, it was almost difficult to recover from it,
In fact, it was the end of the estate.
It was the
end of Orange Hill. In '84, they had to sell it, and it for almost nothing.
The heat of the ashes scorch up a lot of the things, some of the banana, them shrinking, the coconuts, them, and so on.
It was a very diversified estate. They had cocoa and coffee, and all those little crops died immediately, and the coconuts just took longer to die, but they died.
Well, you had to make a fresh start. Okay, you have to replant, like your vegetables and so on. One of the things that I usually do is to try to tell people you do not know when it would erupt again. So always keep your important items. If in case it erupts, you have that time to go and pack up. And so I learned that lesson, you have to be always ready.
Because we don't know when, okay? So we always have to have something put away that when anything, you just put it, get it, and you lead out. Yeah.
One moment, Madam Moderator, we're not hearing you. One moment, please.
So we were saying that funding for Beyond the Ashes was provided by the Community Disaster Risk Reduction Fund, administered by the Caribbean Development Bank, and with support from partners NEMO, SVG Red Cross Society, and the Community Development Division. We'd like at this time to thank the Honorable Prime Minister and Professor Robertson for their presentations. We'd also like to remind visitors that they can pose their questions on YouTube Live or on the chat on uwitv.org. We have also been receiving some questions, and I'm going to be posing these to Dr. Robertson. The first is, did people get signs of an eruption in 1979? I have heard most stories of people just waking up to an eruption. Seems like it took the nation by surprise.
Yes, to a large extent. The eruption and Soufriere eruptions tend to, at least the explosive ones, sometimes they develop very rapidly. In 79, there was some indication, perhaps months before, that they had, like we did just now, some periods of elevated seismicity. But in terms of knowing definitively that it was going to erupt, really, you probably had a few hours at most. And in those days, the monitoring wasn't quite the same. I guess it wasn't as diverse and real time as it is now. And what happened then was that because fortuitously, people were at seismic at the time when it happened in the late afternoon on Thursday evening, I think they realized from the signals definitively that something was about to happen only late into the night. And by the time they had gotten on to the authorities, by the early morning, sort of people sort of, the messaging would not have necessarily gotten to the people that it looked like something was about to happen. It just happened too fast. And I think the mechanism wasn't there to perhaps, get the message out as quickly. But it does develop quickly. It takes a few hours sometimes to Soufriere to get going from nothing happening, which is why I must say that, what we have now, in a sense, is quite a bit of precursory signal that it can do something. It's telling us that it's having an effusive eruption, and that, we're now at that stage where we could tell people to do certain things. So we should make use of, in a sense, all of this activity that's happening to put our house in order. So the individuals need to do that and not wait, until something actually happens to do something. I think it's giving us quite a bit of activity now, which is effusive, yes, but I would take it as a warning that it could get explosive, essentially.
Thank you very much. The other question from YouTube: if an explosive eruption occurs, how fast will the people nearby the volcano be alerted?
That's a good question. I can't give you a definitive answer. It's quite uncertain in terms of whether how much warning we would give, or whether we would be able to, in fact. That's why I keep saying that people really need to be on guard for moving very fast. We are working arduously to put in sufficient monitoring elements that we will have some indication, but there is a chance that it simply would move from what it's doing now, which is quietly extruding magma, to something that is much more active and faster and probably explosive within a matter of hours rather than days, as we would like. I believe the National Emergency Organization would like to have, and I know given their plans, would like to have a couple of hours, probably a day or two. There is no guarantee that would happen. So I think we need to hope that would happen, but we need to prepare for the fact that, you're essentially getting your warning now, that something can happen, and that when it happens, there will be very little time. It might be hours, it might be minutes, it might be almost instantaneous. And what you simply have to do when you get that, when you get the message that something is happening, you simply have to move south, using the mechanism that has been developed to do that.
Okay, thank you again. And at this time, we'd like to invite
as having, I think, one dome, and then once it's finished a dome building eruption, it then has an explosive eruption. Clearly, Soufriere has the ability, and it seems in looking back at the records, I might have done it before, to have more than one dome placed in the volcano. From the record, it doesn't seem to make a difference whether it have one or two domes in terms of what it does explosively. So just from the bare minimum that we have, that doesn't seem to make a difference in terms of whether or not one has one dome or two domes. But I would say that if you have a dome, I would expect that it's more likely the more domes you have, given that Soufriere can be explosive, that the next thing that you would do is have some sort of explosive activity. But really, the honest answer is that we don't know whether it makes that much difference.
Thank you very much. I think that there are two persons who are waiting to speak, so we give them that opportunity at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Natalie? Natalie, we are waiting for you. Maybe you may need to unmute your mic. Okay, so Natalie is not ready for us, it seems. There's a question here as well that we can ask. Is there a chance of a collapse of one side of the volcano?
Yes, again, you guys are having some excellent questions. Yes, there is. I mean, there's always a potential for a collapse of any particular part of the volcano. Volcanic edifices are known, particularly in the Caribbean, for having collapses. They've had them in the past, and Soufriere certainly in its past history has had a collapse. This is one of the reasons why I believe people would have seen 2 days ago, we put in something that we call an EDM reflector on one part, on the southern part of the crater wall, mainly because we want to be very early in looking at potential failure along one flank. We don't think it's likely now, but the problem is that as the dome gets bigger, the mass of the dome, is possible that it can cause so much stress on one particular part of the crater wall, the flank, that it could essentially cause it to fail. And we want to see if that's possible. So we have put an instrument, essentially a fancy mirror, in a sense, at the top of the mountain. And what we're going to do, we're going to work with the Land Surveyors Department to get one of the surveyors to come out and shoot a beam of light to it. And with the return period, we look at the distance of the light. We can use the timing of the light and the distance it travels to get essentially a measure of the length from the instrument, from the reflector to where we're measuring from, to see how long it is. And if we do that from various points, we would perhaps be able to tell if that point on the crater rim is moving, and we'd expect that prior to failure, we have done some indication that it's under stress by that point moving. So we're going to measure for that. It's not something that we're particularly concerned about now, but it is something that may become more of a problem as the dome gets bigger, and we're already looking at its possible happening, and therefore trying to find ways of monitoring for it.
Okay, and there's another question, I think, for you. Someone wants to know, how far can the poisonous gas travel, and how can we protect ourselves from it?
Yes, there was a question in the chat I actually responded to. A lot of the gases that come out, as I said, the main thing is really simply water. So it's just vapor, water vapor, steam, essentially, like a boiling kettle. Then another set of gas that we've discovered from the measurements we had are carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide tends to be very dense. It collects in hollows. It's probably going to be most rich in the crater itself, where it can collect. The other thing in low amounts are sulfur-rich gases, hydrogen sulfide, some sulfur dioxide, hydrogen fluoride and fluoride. All of those gases, unholy gases that come up, they mix with the atmosphere and they get very dilute. So that by the time they get further downslope, they're too dilute to cause any serious harm in terms of being really, truly toxic. But some of the sulfur gases, some of the gases, if you have particular respiratory problems, if the levels get to above a certain, perhaps the World Health Standard levels, they can cause problems. So what we have suggested, and I believe NEMO and the authorities locally are moving in that direction, to monitor the quality of the air in the areas, in the villages, in the communities that surround the volcano. That's a precautionary measure to ensure that if there's a chance that the gases, and we don't think there is because it's getting dilute, if there's a chance that it gets into the areas and it gets above a certain quality, a standard set by the World Health Organization, we can alert them and they could take action. That said, one of perhaps the good thing about the gases that probably could cause problems to people, the sulfur-rich gases, is that they're very smelly, essentially. So often when you smell them, our natural instinct is to move away. So if you smell, in fact, the ones that you probably smell often is sulfur-rich, and you will tend to move out of the way. And if you have respiratory problems and it's causing you problems, you will simply move. So you should have that reaction long before it gets to the stage where it causes serious harm. It's being monitored. It's not a big problem we think currently. It's something to be watched. But if you have particular problems and you're particularly susceptible, you really need to perhaps think about moving a little bit further away if it becomes a problem.
Thank you very much, Professor Robertson. At this point, we'd like to invite the Director of the National Emergency Management Organization, Ms. Michelle Forbes, to do her presentation, and also let you know that there will be more opportunities to ask your questions after she has completed her presentation. Ms. Forbes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Danielle. And good evening to everyone. Greetings to the Honorable Prime Minister and Dr. Robertson and team from Seismic Research Center. I'm going to just spend a few minutes looking at our evacuation planning and zero in on Georgetown. We have seen this map quite a bit over the last few weeks, and this is our volcanic hazard map for the La Soufriere volcano, noting that our emphasis is in the red zone and the orange zone. Now, many persons are asking if Georgetown is in the red zone, as we're zeroing on Georgetown this evening. Yes, Georgetown is in the red zone, and we can see the red zone extend all the way down here, going towards I believe it's the Black Point area down that side. So Georgetown is in the red zone for those persons who are questioning whether you're in the red zone or not. Our current alert level remains at orange. We know that we have the ongoing effusive eruption at the La Soufriere volcano, and it may continue for a while, as Dr. Robertson would have said. It may stop, or we can go into an explosive eruption. So what do we do all this time? We need to continue our planning and preparation for any eventuality. And in this way, in this time that we have, we are zeroing on our evacuation planning, tidying up bits and pieces here and there. And if there's an evacuation order being given, the authority lies with the chairman of the National Emergency Management Organization, which is the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister responsible for disaster management. He can issue the evacuation order, or on his behalf, I can also issue that order. Now, many persons are wondering, when you give this evacuation order, how are you going to get this information? There are different modes of communication that we will use, and the ones that we use daily. And we will also use the cap.cap. If you haven't downloaded that, it's an actual mobile application, cap.cap. You can get that on your Android phone or on your Mac and your iPhones, and you can actually download that application and you can receive the early warning from NEMO. You can also receive information from the Met Services. This is an application that is available in different countries also. You can get it in Barbados. If you're in Barbados, St. Lucia, a few other countries, you'll just have to log into the particular country that you're in to receive that. We will send our communication message. Our evacuation order will go by all radio stations. All of our media releases go to all the radio stations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We'll use our social media platform, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, SMS messages. Our mobile providers have agreed for us to use the platform to send information to the public. The police in the community also will be is a major part of this evacuation planning and process, as that they will drive around in their communities with the bullhorns, informing community members that evacuation orders given and give directions. And of course, the community groups and leaders within the communities. We have been working with the Red Cross and other groups within the communities for a number of years, over 15 years, from the time NIMBUC came into existence, and longer than that, in terms of having bullhorns being allocated to members of the community so that they can actually go around and disseminate the message once we pass on that information to them. So at the community level, the community leaders will receive the message, and of course the police. And to note, in the evacuation planning, especially the physical evacuation, the police will actually take control of the movement of persons in and out of the evacuation zones, and will coordinate at the assembly points and at the staging areas. What will the community use? The communities themselves have developed their own or indicated to us the methods that they want to use to communicate to their residents. We have the church bells, the megaphones, the blowing of the vehicle horns, the conch shell, and we saw in the video somebody said that the shouting out, from one commission that will be used in terms of indicating as evacuation order. Now, a lot of persons have been asking about what are the assembly points. This is just a general here showing what the assembly points are in the red zone, and I will zero in on Georgetown a bit. Work that we have been doing over the years span quite a range of activities, from developing the hazard maps for the various communities. And we have developed some so far in collaboration with the Seismic Research Center, and I will just show you a few that we have done here, and then I will zero in on Georgetown. We're not quite finished yet with a map similar to Georgetown, but we have other maps that we have used and worked with other communities and other organizations over the years. Here we see the fancy community hazard map, and this is just giving you an indication of the work we have been doing with the Seismic Research Center on the Volcano Ready project, in terms of looking at a multi-hazard environment and being able to the key persons, the assembly point, emergency shelters, because we're looking at multi-hazard and different activities that the community will undertake. Point community hazard map, just that we are really working in those communities. We have the muster points or the assembly points at evacuation, the Owia Wharf, for example, and the junction to the playing field, and at point in the Courtney Square. These are just some assembly points also within the orange zone, from North Leeward and Chateaubelair and Fitzhughes, but in particular for this particular crisis, we are paying close attention to Chateaubelair and Fitzhughes, because they are the closest communities to the western flank, where we have the dome growth. And in the event that these communities, we have an explosive eruption, it's most likely that these two communities will have to be evacuated first, along with the communities of Fancy, because we must evacuate those communities over the Rabica River, and in this particular scenario, the Chateaubelair and Fitzhughes. Just a quick shot of Chateaubelair hazard map. Now, where do you go when you're evacuated? And these are some of the next few slides I will take look at this. Now, according to our last census, we have in the red zone 5,062 persons, and in the orange zone 10,577 persons roughly. Now, this may increase, and that's why we have a ballpoint figure of 20,000. We had about that number in 1979 to be evacuated, and we use this ballpoint figure because we know there are persons who will be very uncomfortable within their communities when you hear those stones falling on your roof, that they too will want to evacuate. So we have a rough figure for approximately 20,000 persons that will need to be evacuated. There are other things that we have assets in those communities too that will need to be relocated or repositioned. We have 3 warehouses in Noel, Georgetown, and Rose Hall, and these will be repositioned to Baibu Bible and Curtains playing field. No, sorry, these will be repositioned to Bible, Calico, and Barley in particular to serve those communities that will have the population that have to be evacuated. Our staging areas, there are two major staging areas according to our plan, and it was similar to in 1979, the Bible playing field and the Curtains playing field. That is where when persons evacuated, at least if persons self-evacuate and they're not sure where they are going, these are the two areas that will be activated or stood up in terms of our incident command that persons can go to get information and then be dispatched to the various emergency shelters that have been allocated for the different communities. And we'll be utilizing emergency shelters from North Union to Bowley, and of course in the interior, up in the interior, Mespo, Richland Park, Greg's, and those communities. Now, let's start on here a bit. This is a map that was developed a few years ago by the Pan American Development Fund. It's a community project that was ongoing, and we worked and had some input with this particular group. I know one of the members was actually trying to ask a question earlier. And this is really depicting more of central Georgetown, if you want to call it that way, and some of the areas and the sites in Georgetown that we know persons will be able to meet in the event of an evacuation. So this is some of the work that has been ongoing in St. Vincent and the Grenadines through various communities and various projects. I want to zero in here on what are the assembly points in Georgetown. Many persons are asking this kind of questions, and assembly points is where we'll ask you to meet in the event of an evacuation. This is where the public transportation will go, or you will go to coordinate transportation for evacuation out of the community if you have not yet self-evacuated. And, I don't want to go through all, but it's really speaking to the various communities in Georgetown. For example, the old playing field, that persons will go there from Cobotown, Bronxtown, for example. We have the Chile playing field, Langley Park School, Cali Shop in Dixon, Spring Village, Junction Gap, just to name a few. And of course, it continues in, as we know, Georgetown is considered a white community. We have the Perseverance Gap, where persons from O'Brien's Valley and Perseverance and the New Village there will go to Old Chapman School, cater for the New Village in Chapman's and the housing area, Evelyn Shop at Junction, New Chapman's, and that will cater for those people on top of the hill by New Chapman's, and of course the Black Point entrance to cater for those residents just above the gas station, Mount Young area that may not have private transportation. I know this is a bit small, but many persons are asking, when I evacuate, where do I go? What we have in our revised national plan, what we aim to do in this particular instance is at least we can assign communities and shelters where persons from a particular community will go. So far, we have narrowed it down to, for example, the persons in Georgetown will go to these particular shelters in Kingstown. So most likely that you'll be evacuated to Kingstown in this particular scenario. For communities like Fancy will go to Calico and Ratamill area. So we are actually zeroing it down and actually putting more context in to know exactly where do you want to go or where you're going to evacuate to. And this is important, especially if persons are separated, that your community is moving from one community to X community, so that your family will be within one of the shelters within that area. And this will go well. For example, if there's an evacuation in the day, somebody might be in town and the family evacuating and you don't know where you're going to meet them. So you have a general idea of the emergency shelters that they will be able to go. They will be assigned to in general. Now, as part of some of our evacuation procedures, it really begins with an individual and it also goes at the community level. And we really encouraging persons. We have the time now. We think that the volcano is giving us a little time to ensure that everything is in place. We need to ensure that we have our individual family emergency plans, and you need to make arrangements if you do. If you have someone, you can stay within the green zone. That is, of course, our preferred choice, that you have someone, somewhere you can actually go and visit or stay with for some time, but not thinking that we are going to forget you if you go and stay with a friend or family. You must also register and indicate to us that you're staying with a friend or family. And we of course, continue to work with the community teams, the community emergency teams in Georgetown. We have the Red Cross group that is led by Veronica John, and we have Mr. Huggins, who leads the District Disaster Committee in Georgetown. So these are key persons, and they have a team with them. It's not one person alone, and they need more persons to come on board to really work with them, because they will need to mobilize the teams at the assembly points, coordinate the transportation, and of course, provide assistance at many distance. What we are asking the communities to do, we would have done some vulnerability and capacity assessments in these communities through the Red Cross or through community development, in really identifying the vulnerable populations that we have in Georgetown and the Georgetown communities. And this is information that we'll need also to be able to share with our partners, in that who do we have to cater for that will be evacuated, and especially to know that some persons may not be able to be in a public shelter or mass shelter environment, that they may need to be located elsewhere or sheltered elsewhere, because one of our plans for this year, if in the event that we have an explosive eruption, is to really have that partnership, which is ongoing now with the guest houses and hotels. The Ministry of Tourism has already had some dialogue with the guest houses and hotels and those that will accept. We don't have those listed because they're private buildings, but those we are aware of them, and we know the guest houses that will accommodate persons if needed. What we want to ask the community to continue, because we have some of the information, but it is really at the community level that we need to get more information. How many vehicles that we have in a particular community that will be able to transport persons, private transport, including minibuses. And in that way, we will know the number of persons that we need to have send public transportation for. And I'll give you an example. The Fancy community, they have already done their work. Their emergency plan is ready. They have identified 530 persons in their community. 170 persons they can evacuate using their own private transportation. They have about 25 vehicles within the community. So they have indicated to us, okay, 170 persons will be evacuated given the time frame, once they have enough time. And once these vehicles are within the community, they can actually evacuate 170 persons within a short space of time, but they will need assistance to evacuate the remainder of the population. So this is a kind of information we are working with the communities, and we have been working with them over the years, so we can actually zero in and be a bit more specific on the population that we have to serve. Now, during an evacuation procedure, there will be announcement on the time the buses will be at the assembly point, so you're not there waiting for hours. And as you go there there will be we want persons to be orderly in the event of evacuation. There will be registration ongoing, so that we know whether you're going to bus HA599 or just to give a random vehicle number, so that we know that we can account for you and be able to trace you over a period of time in case we know anybody is looking for you. So these are the part of the evacuation procedures that are included in the National Volcano Emergency Plan that the Prime Minister would have spoke about earlier. Now, as part of our national planning, so we have the individual level. Disaster management is the individual responsibility. Also, we have the community level and we have the national level, and the community feeds into the national response. And this is just a snapshot. I instead of going into the entire plan in terms of adding our standard operating procedures for evacuation. And in the evacuation planning, we have to think of both a day scenario and a night scenario. And on the left, I just have some of the agencies that will be involved in the evacuation process according to our SOP, our standard operating procedures, and of course a range of responsibilities. As I said before, the physical evacuation really comes under the bit of the police, and that will be led by the Commissioner of Police and his team. And as you can see there on the right, the various roles and responsibility and procedures and activities that will be undertaken once an evacuation order is given by the key agencies involved. So that's just a snapshot of what is happening in the event of evacuation. So I just want to show you just a few slides now. And many persons think that we have not been doing work over the years. We have done a tremendous work with the Seismic Research Center, with other entities, the Red Cross, with other groups that have worked on volcano planning for volcanic emergencies. And these are some snapshots from our exercise Trade Winds in 2019. Many persons thought, well, okay, why are we exercising for a volcano? But we know that we are living with this risk. We knew that it will erupt at some time. Many of us hope it will erupt in our lifetime, but it is erupting. effusively, and we don't know what is going to happen in the future, so we have to plan for reality. So these are just a snapshot looking at our National Emergency Operations Center during the trade wind exercise. You can see a range of players here, and so too if there's an explosive eruption, we have support from a regional organization or local organizations. Here we had someone from Martinique, where we had somebody from the French Red Cross, and of course we had a soldier there from Jamaica. So it is quite a regional effort that we have been undertaking over the years. This is showing you the evacuation via sea that we had on the West Coast, and it was successful in this particular exercise. We were able to evacuate 200 persons within 15 minutes. It took us 15 minutes for the boat to get up to Barley. On the women's side, it was a bit more challenging in that it took us quite a while to move persons from the Owea Fisheries Complex to the Coast Guard vessel. So we know, yes, we have the plans for sea evacuation within our plan, but knowing that the challenges on the coast might be a bit more challenging or difficult than on the west coast, between Barley and Chateaubelair area, because the waters are calmer. And I will end with just this last photo, again showing the persons lining up to evacuate during our exercise, and basically persons at the Barley Primary School there welcoming the evacuees from 2019 exercise. So these are some of the things we are working on. We have been engaged within both the red and orange zones, but also in the green zones, because we have communities like Calico who's ready to receive persons. They have been meeting, so we'll be doing more community sessions within all the communities, because we have those that will be evacuated and those that will be receiving persons for an explosive eruption. So thank you very much, and any questions I'll be remaining to answer.
Thank you very much, Director of NEMO, Ms. Michelle Forbes, for your presentation. We'd also like to thank all of the other presenters before you. Of course, you are the final presenter in our lineup this evening. At this point, we'd also like to remind viewers that you can post your questions on YouTube Live and on the chat on uwitv.org. I understand that there are two persons with raised hands who would like to ask some questions. Are they ready? Do we have Natalie again? Natalie and Leon? Okay, so while we await Natalie and Leon, they are up, but I'm not hearing or seeing what's happening with them. I don't know if someone can let me know what's happening. But in the meantime, maybe we can take some questions from our other platforms. Are there any questions from the other platforms that we have? Okay, so there's a question. What forum will NEMO use to let people know that they need to evacuate? Will this message come from NEMO or from the police? And this question is for Ms. Forbes, of course, and it's coming from UWI-TV. Michelle Forbes? What forum? Okay.
Yeah, what forum would we use to disseminate information? Yes, all forms of our communication flow, which will be via the radio, via the social media. We will inform the police also. Once the police is informed, then they can also go around and do and give the evacuation order once they have received it from us. So all forms of communications will be used to disseminate the evacuation order and information to the public.
Okay. Thank you very much for your response.
This is Leon now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are, Leon.
Yes. Well, we know we have the pandemic on us, right? And evacuation process where social distance is quite phenomenal right now. how many people can we move in a quick time because of social distancing, and what kind of methods do we have people to check the temperature and those kind of things? Ms. Forbes.
Yes, Ms. Forbes, your question.
Yes. We would have actually put these measures in place since before the start of the 2020 hurricane season in working with the Ministry of Health. And these are the procedures that guidelines to enter the emergency shelters. Even transportation in the minibuses, you must have your mask before you can board the bus. When you get to the emergency shelter, you will be your temperature will be checked, you will be registered, and we'll have a bit more robust questioning on your health status, whether you have been exposed to the virus or somebody who has been in contact, or have you been in close contact. Also asking all emergency shelters to have a separate room or section where persons who may have flu-like symptoms can be isolated or quarantined until health personnel get in the scheme of things. During our activation for emergency shelters, the district health services team also do visit the emergency shelters. They may not be there at the time of registering, but they visit daily at the emergency shelters to really check what is happening. And of course, any unusual high temperatures or anything that is a suspect, that they will be reported by the shelter manager immediately to the district health team. We are also going to equip the shelter managers with PPEs as we're in the COVID environment. That's personal protective equipment, so that they reduce the spread of them actually being affected while serving in the emergency shelters. So these are the procedures that we have had in place since 2020 and will continue into this particular pandemic period.
Okay, Michelle, some more questions from our Q&A. Are there any plans for livestock? And someone also wants to know, Mansfield Coffee wants to know, what should residents expect on their arrival at the evacuation center? And is there anything in place if there's an electricity failure and heavy rainfall? So that's 3 questions for you right there.
Okay, in terms of the livestock, the Ministry of Agriculture has actually a livestock plan, so they will address the issue of livestock in their plan, and I know they're having contingencies to look at the livestock for persons, of course. So they will address that, fall under the Ministry of Agriculture. When you go to the evacuation centers, it's one of the second questions. When you go to the evacuation centers, of course, I ask you, as during the hurricane season, when you're going to the emergency shelter, you take what you can with you. You take some bedding, you take a little bit of food, you take water, you take your usual supplies, your medicines. When you get there, once we have enough warning time, we will have cots and blankets dispatched to all the emergency shelters. The thing is that a lot of shelters do not have this where you can actually store these items, so they have to be moved in the same time that evacuation is ongoing, and you may not always have the lead time. So you take what you can to the emergency shelter, but the cots and those things will be actually transported into the emergency shelters or the evacuation centers, as you say. In terms of electricity, not all emergency shelters have backup power. So if electricity goes, then you have lanterns and lamps and flashlights. And we ask you also, as part of your go-to bag, to have those things with you, flashlights, and especially if you're evacuating in the night. And these things should be packed in your bag. So most of the evacuation centers do not have backup power. So during the night, of course, you will have to use the lamps and that available. Not the gas lanterns. We're looking at battery-operated lanterns because we don't want another threat or risk in terms of having fires. In terms of heavy rainfall, we're in a multi-hazard environment. These are things that we have to plan for. We have heavy rainfall all the time. We can have this particular effusive eruption phase going into the hurricane season where we have all these hazards. So we're in a multi-hazard environment, and we have dealt with flooding and all of these hazards and threats before. So there's not going to be anything new. If rain is falling, we evacuate the same. We take all the necessary precautions as we do take during the periods of heavy rainfall.
Okay, and Natalie wants to know, what about if I choose to rent a house? And someone is saying that they think they missed the point where you mentioned where will the persons from Georgetown be evacuated to?
For where would persons from Georgetown evacuated to is generally in the Kingston area, Richmond Hill, Kingston area. Those are the designated emergency shelters for the persons from the Georgetown communities. From Natalie, yes, that's something that we are exploring. I'm not going to say yes or no yet, but that's something that we're exploring. There are persons who have already indicated that they have contacted persons where they can rent and their family can stay together. And that's something I know that our organization will be taking on board and the government will be taking on board for those persons who want to find their own arrangements or make their own arrangements.
Okay, someone is saying that they saw a document that one of the assembly points is at the bridge in Georgetown where the buses turn. Has NEMO considered the congestion that might be there because it's one-way traffic?
Yes, and these assembly points are not casting steps among themselves and say, okay, well, we don't want this to be used. We work with the community and actually choose those assembly points. We don't choose them, just to bear in mind that they're not selected by the staff. These points are selected by the members in the community. So if, of course, you decide as a group that you want different assembly points or different meeting points, that can be arranged. So it's up to you in the community where you want to meet. But we will take that into consideration.
Okay, how can the public access the up-to-date disaster and evacuation plan? And is it that the green area would be totally safe regardless of the type of eruption? Or is there a possibility the folks in the green area may have to get evacuated as well?
We expect that once we have gone through the normal procedures for the plans, or plans have to be go through the approval process. As soon as that is completed, we expect within a week or so we should have those uploaded and can be available to various persons. We have key institutions that have the plan now because we're actually ensuring that things are tidied up. So as soon as the approval process is completed, but what we're doing here tonight is actually sharing some pieces of the plan. So to the general public and the population in Georgetown in general. In terms of the green zone, maybe I will ask Richie to answer that in terms of the persons in the green zone.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Given what Soufriere has done, given what it is capable of, we anticipate that the most that the green zone will have to deal with is ash, periodic ash fall, and really only when the wind blows to the south. It has happened in the past. Most often the dominant wind directions are to the east and west, but on rare occasions it can be to the south. And if that is the case, then yes, that's the effect they would have. In terms of other effects such as flows and bombs and things like that, that is extremely unlikely. We don't see any eruption like that happening, such that the island itself is compromised in that way. It's the ash they will have to deal with. And it can be a nuisance, but we anticipate that it would be periodic. It wouldn't be persistent for days on end. That would be quite unusual. The wind pattern will have to change completely for that to happen.
Okay, and since you do have the microphone, Professor, what are the chances of there being a pyroclastic eruption?
I think I don't know what a pyroclastic eruption is. I think they might be speaking about an explosive eruption that produces some things that are called pyroclastic flows. I've actually been speaking about them before. When I speak about the flows, I didn't call them always pyroclastic flows, but they are. Essentially, one of the most dangerous things from explosive eruptions from our volcano is the fact that when an explosion happens, sometimes, often the material goes up in the air and it creates a plume. But sometimes it can collapse on itself. And all that material, all that hot ash and gas and everything, then moves down the mountainside very quickly as a flow. That is called a pyroclastic. The pyroclastic comes from the fact that it's hot pieces of rock moving on the mountainside, following the valleys very fast, bulldozing and destroying everything in its way. That's the most dangerous things from our volcanoes. And they can happen, and they often happen in explosive eruptions. It's a characteristic of explosive eruptions from volcanoes like ours. So once you have an explosive eruption, pyroclastic flows, or density currents as we call them, can move down the mountainside and can affect and destroy lots of areas lower down on the flanks of a volcano, which is precisely why we need to move people out of harm's way and get them south.
Okay, and another question for you, Professor. Is there a chance that La Soufriere can go extinct after an explosive eruption if it occurs?
Well, we don't like to use extinct with volcanoes like La Soufriere because they're relatively young. And there's no indication that La Soufriere has gotten so old that it will never erupt again. And that's where we use the term extinct. So, but yes, it is possible, and Soufriere has often have had long periods of what we call repose, or long quiet periods in between eruptions. That's how they behave. Our volcanoes, in fact, in the whole Caribbean, our volcanoes, and that's perhaps one of the problems with them, our volcanoes erupt very infrequently, and therefore people forget that they can erupt, and therefore, they're not so well prepared for eruptions. Fortunately, well, Soufriere is not necessarily one of them. Ours is one of the more active ones. But I can't see it in this present stage of his life. I don't see it going extinct. I think it's going to be active for quite a long time. In fact, longer than most of us will be around. And from time to time, in this current live state, it will erupt from time to time.
Okay, Fobbs, back to you. Someone wants to know, persons who do not want to move, will they be forced to move? And if so, how?
No, will not be forced to move. We will ensure that we let the persons know that an evacuation order is given, and if you choose to stay, you'll be staying at your own risk.
Okay.
May I just? Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, Teresa, that when a national emergency under the NEMO Act, if a national emergency is declared, not a state of emergency, there's that authority to involve, which could involve compulsion. And of course, you can always declare a state of emergency for the geographic area, or for the whole country for that matter, for the period when the volcanic eruption takes place. In which case, if you declare state of emergency, you will have a certain of your fundamental rights and freedoms are suspended. But Michelle answered the way she answered, because it is not the intention of the government to use the law as a sword. We use it as a shield. And that is why we want to build in everything that we do a consensus to show persons that it is within the interest. If we have a greater sense of responsibility with these challenges, and we know we have to live well with these things on an ongoing basis as a community, it makes really far better sense for everybody to buy in. You may have a few recalcitrant ones, but there is a challenge in using the law as a sword. You may get pushed back, but if you try to encourage people, and this is what we have been doing. So Michelle is quite correct in that sense, that your own self-interest is at stake, and we will persuade you. But there is the legal framework to induce compulsion. But one doesn't want to do that. The state, the government will prefer for us all to be persuaded. Doing it in a commandist manner has its problems it is better you do it in an authoritative way, not a command this way, an authoritative way with buy-in from everyone. And that is why, when I sit here listening to Professor Robertson and to Michelle, and to see the distance we have come in terms of preparation for events like, possibly events like an explosive volcanic eruption. It really is a mark of the progress. And I'm urging all those who are involved in disseminating information not to pick on this little thing or that, but for us all to move forward in a united manner on things like these. I make the same point with COVID. I make the same point with hurricanes and floods and the like, and I make the point very emphatically with a possible explosive volcanic eruption. So that's what I would add to what Michelle has said. I don't think I've misspoken in that regard, Michelle, in respect of where the law permits the compulsion in the manner in which I describe it, that can happen, both under the NEMO Act and generally speaking in the declaration of a state of emergency.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that response. Michelle, we are back. Someone wants to know whether there's a plan for the disabled, and does the evacuation plan cover all aspects, including a nighttime explosive eruption?
In the planning, yes, we have the two scenarios: evacuation during the day and evacuation at night. And of course, the evacuation at night will be a bit more challenging. So yes, the plan caters for both evacuation day and night. In terms of the disabled, we ask in the persons as we said, we are collecting information on the vulnerable population. I know the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Mobilization, they also have that information, and they actually have indicated they're working in their plan to look at some of the issues of the disabled and the physically challenged. We also ask in the communities to map or identify these key vulnerable persons, and that will need to really cater for in the event of an evacuation. So that's part of the ongoing planning in terms of being able to assist or support those with physically challenged and other challenges, mobility issues that we have in the community. So that's all part of the plan, but also as families, we encourage you to have your own individual plan that you deal with for your persons within your home who may be so challenged. So it's really a united effort, a coordinated effort with the families that have those individuals in their home, and also at the national level between us, the Ministry of Mobilization, and all the entities that will be involved.
Okay, and someone said that they heard you mention Fancy, they're impressed, but where do persons in Chile go to register themselves to be evacuated? Because I'm sure you like to know how much of us need to be evacuated.
In Chile, I know, what's his name? Chile, we have someone there that is on the committee there. Is it James Brown? But you can actually get information from James Brown and a few other persons. You can also get the information from the community development officers for those communities.
The persons from Chile would go to the areas where everybody from Georgetown would be going, because Chile is part of the Georgetown conurbation, part of the Georgetown area. And from the points of where you're gathering, as Michelle pointed them out, anybody from Chile would be able to get within walking distance to any of those points. So that shouldn't be. The important thing is to have the information about the points and of where the gathering points, the meeting points for the transport. Of course, some of you will have your own cars and pickups and trucks and so on. And that would be, you'll just go into what would be the broad area where persons from Georgetown would be going. in relation to the Teresa, the matter about your animals, like your cattle, Michelle had made the point about the Ministry of Agriculture will deal with that, and Saboto has dealt with it. The Minister of Agriculture has dealt with it the other night on a consultation. And you tag the animals. Obviously, if you come into town and you have a few heads of cattle, there's no way in town you can graze them. So you have to tag them and let them go. That's one option. Or if you get somewhere in South Windward, in the Humble African constituency, or up in Mesville by Jimmy, and you get somewhere to stay there and you have 2 cattle, you might be able to find some land at Montreal and so on. You know what I mean, Richie? These are individual decisions which could be made within the broad plan. And persons, there are persons who do these things. But if not, as what happened in 1979, as the lady said, and as Martin Barnard said, you let go the animals. Some of them, a few of them died, or they lost them. They may have 1 or 2 criminals who would have gone into the area when the immediate threat had subsided before people went back and take the animals. But you will tag them. I think there's that process. All right?
Okay, thank you. And is there any plan during evacuation for the persons over the dry river if the rivers there are not passable? And PM, will there be measures in place to protect our assets we left behind from looters?
Well, let us look at this in a practical way. The police will certainly return when it is safe to do so. You must remember, police are human beings. When the soufriere is blowing and you're running out, the police not going in. Because a policeman is the son of a woman, the husband or partner, and a father. Not because he's a policeman that the soufriere going to respect him. So from a purely practical matter, there'd be some days immediately, and Richie, Professor Robertson can say how many days this is likely to last in the most dangerous phase. But then, upon the proper advice, police security forces will move back. You have Coast Guard, you could land people at particular points if the roads are impassable, and so on and so forth. So there is a security plan also. But in terms of when you move out, somebody comes in to protect it from looters. I don't see that happening while the soufriere blowing. I don't know if Richie has experience, for instance, in Montserrat, whether that happened. I was just telling a couple of my friends who are here at the office of the Prime Minister, where I am, and I was asking them, a couple of the employees here, who are my friends and colleagues, if they ever went to Montserrat and see what Plymouth, Richie, what Plymouth looks like. The old capital now is a wasteland. So it depends on a number of factors and circumstances. Thank God in 1979, we didn't have any loss of life. And while there was damage and loss, it wasn't on a scale like, for instance, you had when the soufriere blew in, when the volcano blew in Montserrat. But there's a security plan.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. And we have some raised hands from our webinar. Leon and Elsia, are you there?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I have some concerns, right? I would like to know how far along the the community evacuation plan is for Georgetown, in terms of have you already have transportation committed to move persons? And is there a team already assigned to each muster point so that there will be ease of evacuation? I see a point on the plan says you're going to register persons as they enter on the buses when during evacuation, right? How feasible is that? Because based on what Professor Robinson said, we may not have like days warning before an explosive eruption.
No.
I was thinking that
Michelle, sorry, Eltia.
Yes, Mr. Prime Minister. Yes, sir.
Michelle, this LT she's a senior lady working in the statistical office in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. She's a very organized woman. Get her on your committee. So we're recruiting you right now. You hear me?
I humbly accept. I would like to volunteer.
Very good. You have a good person there, Michelle. Thank God you're calling, girl.
Okay, so that's Elthea.
So Elthea had a few comments and questions, and I really want to encourage Elthea to work with the group that's already existing in Georgetown. We have a couple groups there, and then you can lend your expertise to those groups. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but get on board with the groups. We will get your contact so that you can actually communicate with the members there. In terms of the community planning, I know that the group, they have met several times in terms of having their groups assigned to the assembly points. I still think it's a work in progress, and so they're looking for persons that can assist them in terms of mobilizing on the ground. So there's always room where persons in the community can actually join them. I take your point also in the evacuation process that you may not be able to register persons going on the buses. That's a reality. You may not be able to do it, but certainly when you get to your first point, that you'll be able to do the registration there. But it's just a part that even though you may not get the complete names or the complete details, you must have a head count at least of the persons who have actually boarded the buses. And also when the buses reach to their destination or their transit point, you must have a count also of the persons on board. So you may not be able to do the full registration, but it is needed for the actual count and to really to account for persons who are evacuating.
Thank you, dear. And Leon? Leon is next. Leon Hebron, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. You heard me?
Yes, we are.
Yes, it's not a question per se, but it's just a commendation for Miss Forbes and Nemo and the Honorable Prime Minister. Good venture. Keep it up. Keep the nation informed. And thank you.
Thank you, dear. And Leon is next. And thank you as well. Someone is asking if there are different measures that
Yes, it's not a question per se, but it's just a commendation for Ms.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leon. Thank you very much for that. So someone wants to know if there are different measures which would be taken, whether it be night or day, during an explosive eruption. Forbes?
We had a similar question earlier and that indicate that we have different procedures. We have in our plan, it caters for both the night evacuation, the day evacuation. Of course, in the night, you will need lighting at the sites, for example, wherever you're going to evacuate persons to. And of course, you'll have to be extremely cautious. So there's always a difference between the night and day evacuation. And all of that is taken on board in our planning. So there will be different resources that will be needed for the night versus what you may need for during the day. And of course, it depends on the time also of when the evacuation order is given, what time of the night or what time of the day. So the night evacuation, at the sites, for example, where we would evacuate persons to, and of course we have to be extremely cautious. So there's always a difference between the night and day evacuation. All of that is happening.
Okay, Michelle, thank you for that. Just a reminder to participants that you will need to provide a name if you're asking a question. So that's our webinar participants. Please give your name if you're asking a question. From UWI-TV, perhaps for Professor Robertson or Nemo, what level of preparation should people living in the green zone make to be able to effectively live through an explosive eruption in terms of food, water, etc.?
I would say that you make the same preparations because you have to be prepared in the green zone for persons, an influx of persons within if you want to say it, within your space. And I always make the point, for example, if you go to the clinic and you normally meet 20 persons and you go after an explosive eruption, you're going to meet more persons. So you have to take similar measures as the persons who are evacuating. The same thing, you stock up on your food supply. Just as in any emergency, you really should have to take the same procedures. Measures in place. Of course, we have the volcano comes with its threats and hazards. We may have volcanic ash, especially if you're closer to the northern part of the island. We may have volcanic ash that you too have to protect yourself in terms of wearing the mask. Not the mask, same as we were wearing the mask for the current pandemic, but particularly in the volcanic scenario, dust mask because you can have a lot of ash. So we basically have to make the same arrangements and really be prepared to really welcome persons from those areas that will be evacuated. So preparations tend to be similar. Of course, you would not have to evacuate, but you will be affected by some of the same hazards that they would be affected. Maybe not as severe, but definitely you will have some impact.
Okay, from YouTube, would evacuation maps and muster points information be available online?
Yes, we have actually started disseminating some of our maps online, and we are now putting some graphics towards the muster points. So those will be shared online also. And the Red Cross has indicated that they're willing to support some of the muster point signs or the assembly point signs throughout the community. So we are working with different agencies. We're working, having the graphics both online and physical muster points within the communities. So they will be available, and those are being worked on as I speak. So we should have those available this week in terms of the graphics.
Okay, so there's a Q&A. Regarding possible evacuation, by and large, there is a single main road out of the red and orange zone, and I suspect bottleneck situations may be created in some places during evacuation. Have you identified alternative routes for evacuation? A population map shows the importance of this, particularly on the windward side of the island, where there are more persons to be moved. Suggestion using a BM with a road overlay to identify the safest alternative routes out of the red and orange zones. And that's from O. Oliver.
Well, I note he also gave his recommendations. There is a separate transportation plan that will be coordinated and executed by the police in terms of trying to restrict the traffic as much as possible within those areas, as the list indicated. it's a one way in, one way out, especially on the Windward Highway, most of the and Windward and Leeward Highway. So we expect there will be some bottlenecks, but of course, as part of the transportation plan, we know that the police and the other entities are working to have a smooth transition in the event that we have an evacuation order given for an explosive eruption.
Okay, and someone is saying that the question of the impassable river was not addressed.
In terms of the river, and we had a similar discussion not too long today, and we, from the experience with the last Soufriere volcano, it has to be, if really bad off, for you to really stay back into the community to have the passable river. Many persons think that when the initial eruption is going to come down with all the pyroclastic flows and all of that, that may not happen. And I'm kind of answering like Dr. Robertson, but really, once the evacuation order is given, is for you to get out as soon as possible. And normally, when the volcano starts to erupt, it doesn't necessarily send stuff along the river. We don't know that will happen, but basically, if you're stuck above the river, and then the other point of evacuation is via sea, via the Oweo Wharf, if you can get there. So we're hoping that once you start seeing something happening, once you get the evacuation order, you will actually leave before it reaches that stage where we can actually have any heavy flow down to not just the Arabica River, because it has to be a pretty heavy flow to take out the Arabica River, but also down the other tributaries that you see the regular flooding normally happens during the hurricane season. So it is important to really understand the signs and being able to take action when the evacuation order is given, or if you see something unusual that is happening.
Okay, Michelle, somebody is saying that their previous question, re-evacuation, wasn't adequately addressed. They want to know specifically what to expect in relation to sanitation, water, food, sleeping quarters, security, bathroom, etc., in the event that they are evacuated.
Well, as much as possible, we are going to have, as indicated earlier, the shelters will be activated. Persons are expected to take their food for a few days, water also, and as quickly as we can get these amenities into the emergency shelters, they will be done. For example, some churches that will be used as evacuation centers may not have food as yet. Food will actually have to take into those emergency shelters, so that may take some time. But those schools and so that are used as emergency shelters that have supplies in the shelters, those are being used. So we're asking you, when you evacuate, for the first few hours, that you need to be able to be a little bit self-sufficient in taking some food, some water, and some of your own supplies. And that's why we encourage you to have your grab-and-go bag ready, so that you have something for yourself until the system kicks into place, because you may not have a lot of time to plan in terms of activating the shelters. You cannot have food sitting at an emergency shelter for a year and you don't have anything happen. So these are things that have to be brought in. At each emergency shelter, it's different. Some may have more bathrooms, more showers, some may not have, but those we actually have those listed, that we know what has showers versus water tanks, extra storage of water tanks. Those have the kitchen. So all of those things that we have in our plan, so that we know if a particular shelter does not have these amenities, that then it will have to be provided for. So let's not fool ourselves within the first few hours where things are going to be have to put in place. But when you get there right now, everything may not be in place. So it is up to you also to ensure that you have your own supplies that you can take with you for the first few hours. But we know that we are working towards ensuring that all of those things will be in place.
If I may just add to what Michelle has said, and I think it's an excellent answer, because there is unevenness in the facilities, in the quality of the facilities at the emergency shelters. Michelle's team has sent for me. I requested it and they had it prepared. For every emergency shelter, there is a checklist as to toilets, bathrooms, water tanks. The newer schools which we built have bathroom facilities, toilets upstairs and downstairs, and they have more showers. And they also have a water tank, every one of them. But you have to remember this. Why you would have to take some water? Water is cut off. Let's go there. The ash is going to fall in the tanks, in the water tanks. In 1979, one of the problems in Beckway is that the water tanks, Richie, had a lot of ash in them. So that CWSA, as part of the overall plan, has to have, in addition to you taking water for the first couple of hours, as Michelle said, we'll have to move water if you have a problem with that the water is in fact cut off at the particular shelters. We must remember this too. We are fortunate in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that the water, the areas, the water catchments which serve the whole country, all of them are interconnected. So that when you come into areas which are not directly affected, like in the red zone or the orange zone, you're going to have, as you had in 1979, water inside of your own community, in the community to which you are going. So but just in case you don't get it, plans are made so that water you can get to you, just like in any hurricanes. When the water is cut off or any storm, we have to bring water. But let us understand this, and this thing is not going to be a bed of roses. If you have to move, you're accustomed to being in your own bedroom. You're going into a school or you're going into some other facility. If it's a guest house or anything like that, apartments, building, the place is going to be more crowded than usual. So we have to get our heads around these practical things. And as Michelle said, we are planning in a way to have certainly the accommodation and the facilities much better than we had in 1979. But still, it's not going to be your home, eh? And that's why she said the ideal thing is as many persons as possible get to stay with their friends or family to ease the public pressure. And that's why all of us have to buy in this enterprise.
Moderator, can I just add to that and endorse with the Prime Minister in the context that and particularly regarding a question that was asked in terms of what effects you would have in the green zone. If you have an explosive eruption, one of the main effects that you will have throughout the country is the potential for ash to get into everything. And as you know, most of our catchments for water is open. So it's a problem that was identified before in previous exercises to the CWSA, and they know that. And I suspect that they will have to put in measures to deal with the fact that you potentially could have ash in quite a few areas and the effects that could have on your water supply. And it's something that needs to be factored into the equation in terms of planning. Certainly the effects of ash, whether it is intermittent or whether it is much more heavy, it basically could cause wider impacts than just simply on the volcano itself.
Thank you, Professor. We'd like to ask a question of Professor Landis, the chair of the UWI COVID-19 Task Force at this time. And that question is, how is the UWI supporting national authorities such as NEMO and the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines with the COVID response?
Okay, the UWI task force is a regional task force. So we are deployed across the whole Caribbean, whether that's CARICOM members like Haiti, Suriname, or Barbados, or St. Vincent. The way we work is everything we do is at the invitation of CARICOM. So we work every week. We meet with the core coordinating group, which would be CARFA and SEDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency. And of course, SEDEMA is the actual organ that would interface with Michelle and with the St. Vincent Emergency Services. So we would provide whatever expertise is needed when there is a disaster. I think you would know that when Hurricane Erica, Tropical Storm Erica struck Dominica, we would come in and provide the kind of support that's needed immediately. Things like water quality experts, things like engineers, also psychologists. When there's populations who are traumatized, you have to provide that kind of support. So unfortunately, we've had a lot of experience with hurricanes, and we think it'll be relatively similar, the kind of support that we offer. With our engineers, our doctors, our psychological support experts, and now, of course, with COVID, we would provide whatever expertise we can. Listening to Michelle, I really had nothing to add to the preparations during a time of pandemic that she has outlined. They're already published by CARFA. And she has specified all those additional measures. I have nothing further to add to what she had to say. So suffice to say that when a hurricane happens like Dorian, the last one, UWI is right there.
Thank you so much, Professor. And as we get into the final stages of today's program, eyeing La Soufriere, we'd like to invite the previous presenters to give us their final comments, starting, of course, with Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Ralph E. Gonsalves.
I will yield my time to Michelle and Professor Robertson. I just want to say, let us be calm, let us be focused, let us be united, and don't allow false information and mischievous people to distract us. Just ignore that. This is a serious business. This is not about ratings for a radio show or how many likes you get on social media for saying something just contrary. This is a serious business. And listen to the authorities, and let us do our work as a serious people, befitting of our Caribbean civilization and its magnificent Vincentian component. We're making the plans, and you're being informed on an ongoing basis, and more information will come out. But you have to listen, and you have to pose the questions and get the answers, as we have been doing. I think this has been a great session. Thanks to all those who have participated.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Professor Robertson?
Yes, thank you very much. I agree. I think it's important that we continue to educate the public and that the public take the information. People often ask about the question of when and how much warning we'll have for explosive activity, and they perceive that as something of the worst thing that can happen. That is quite correct. It's a good question to ask, but really the question to ask also is, what am I doing at an individual level to take the warning and take the information that you have now, prepare for if that happens and when it happens, if it does. There's a lot of information out there, as the Prime Minister said, as we've all said. We give you the information all the time about what is happening. We track the dome. We give you a picture of what's happening. We tell you, I've told you what are the possibilities in terms of what we think likely at this volcano. I think you need to take each of them and put plans in place at an individual level for what you do, what your response would be. We hope that it will end. It will end and it goes back to sleep, and we have a couple of years still. But the fact is, we live in a beautiful country. We have a fantastic, an amazing country and landscape that is created by volcanoes. And unfortunately, every now and then these volcanoes do what they do, which is erupt and produce new material. The same land that we live on, it was created by them. So we have to learn to live with them, and learning to live with them means that we have to have plans in place to respond to the negative impacts of the eruptions that can happen. We know there are plans, we have heard about the plans. We need to get involved in making sure we understand the plans, understand what to do, so that when something happens that could harm us, we could take the action to minimize the impact of that harm on ourselves individually, on our family, and on our community. Once we do that, we should be fine. St. Vincent is one of those places that a lot of work has gone in terms of educating the public, in terms of preparing for volcanic emergencies. There's a reason for that. Seismic have always been interested in St. Vincent, particularly because it's a volcano. It has a volcano that erupts pretty often. So, you know, we have all the potential means by which we can deal with what we have to face. We just need to hunker down and face it. And I think we should be in good spirits, and we should be in good stead when we do that. I'd suggest that you keep on listening, keep on preparing, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and we should be okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. And Michelle Forbes, you have the final say.
We need to be ready for any eventuality. I really want to reiterate the points of individual preparedness is key. And for those persons who want to work with the groups in the community to get on board, because it is a national effort. It starts from the individual level, the community level, up to the national level. And we will work with you during this period to ensure that we all are ready to face any adversities that may arise from any explosive eruption, and also for any continued effusive eruption for the La Soufriere volcano. So thank you, Yui, and thank you to everyone for joining us on this program today, and good evening.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Ms. Forbes, for this very informative session. I'm sure that we all benefited tremendously from participating. Please be reminded that for additional information, participants, you can visit NEMO and the UWI SRC online platform, social media, as well as the website. And link to these will be posted in the chat for the webinar, UWI TV and YouTube. Remember, your questions can also be sent to src@sta.uwi.edu. There's a brief feedback survey link posted in the chat, and we would appreciate it very much if you would give us your feedback so that we may be able to continue to improve upon our communication. Thank you very much, UWI TV. Thank you very much, SRC. Thank you, NEMO. And we look forward to more sessions like these coming up in the future. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you for viewing. Good evening.